do you think about the equal pay protests of the women's movement in the 1960s?
Naturally, I would. Well, I don't know about naturally, but I would. I support it. I would support it. I believe it's the right thing to do. I think there's still, even today, unequal pay sometimes between women and men, which I think you can't justify. But I'm, I lived all through that. That was very much a part of, a lot of the civil rights movement I lived through, the women's rights movements I lived through, a lot of the protesting that went on in the 60s, I lived through all that. So, no, I think your question's somewhat simple to answer. I absolutely supported it.
What did you think of the women's movement, equal pay protests specifically?
When? What
In
protest?
1960.
They should have gotten equal pay.
Should
They
have?
should always get equal pay for equal jobs. Always, always, always. Yep.
So, did you support the women's movement of the 1960s?
I was fairly young in the beginning of the 1960s. I was 10 years old in 65. But as I got older and we understood more about it, of course we supported it. We really felt that, women certainly deserved equal pay for the kinds of work that they were doing. One of the problems, though, was that it really had a somewhat negative impact on maternity leaves, because people really didn't want to consider that women now should get maternity leave off, that it counted as some sort of disability, because here we were claiming that we could do everything that men could do. And that caused some serious problems for women as the movement progressed.
And what was the public opinion toward marches, and how are they broadcasted on TV?
A lot of them were broadcasted on TV. The public opinion upon marches, I think, was very mixed, extremely mixed. Some people obviously supported march and protest, and the protest for civil rights, but there were people clearly against it, clearly and openly against it. But I can remember at the time being a young person and sitting in front of a television and watching this, and I was young at the time when a lot of this was taking place, being in awe of what was going on in our country. It was a very interesting time.
What was the public's opinion towards the marches?
Public didn't like it too much. It was a lot of protesting going on at the time, but people didn't like the protesting. They thought women, they had their place, but it wasn't right.
Media has influenced your opinion, both positively and negatively, on the women's movement.
I think media for the most part, just the obvious, shares with our nation, or shares with the public what's going on. Is there a negative influence? I think as I like to think, as bright people, we're able to decipher right and wrong, and I don't know that the media necessarily influence. And I'll just speak from a personal viewpoint. I don't know that the media influences me in what I believe, and knowing what's right and knowing what's
How
right.
do you think that media influenced your opinion positively and negatively?
To that?
Yeah, for the women's movement.
You had one problem was with this crazy woman, Gloria Steinem. Steinem she's a radical. She still is a radical. And her tactics weren't too great. They should have just politically gone through it and worked towards getting equal everything.
How do you think the media influenced your opinion both positively and negatively?
I'm not sure that it influenced my opinion an awful lot. One of the things that was kind of interesting was that a lot of the women's movement was occurring around the same time as civil rights movements. And I think that the recognition of African Americans and the need for their freedoms kind of eclipsed the women's movement early on. In fact, I read recently that the legislation that was passed in order to give women equal rights was stuck into the same legislation to pass the Civil Rights Act. So they sort of ran in tandem, and while I don't know whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, I do think people reflected probably more on the overall civil rights legislation than they were interested in women getting more pay for more money.
Okay, thank you.
The end?